everyone, and welcome back to Internet Report's Pulse Update, the bi-weekly podcast where we discuss what's up, what's down, what's working and not working, and generally keep our finger on the pulse of how the internet is holding up week over week. And this week we're discussing why the root cause of big cloud and app outages often comes in small packages, and exploring how they played out during the recent .au DNS issues, as well as outages at Salesforce and Microsoft Azure. And joining me to discuss all this week is Bernie, my good friend, colleague, senior engineer at ThousandEyes, and all-round nice guy. Hi, Bernie.
Hey, Mike. Thanks for having me. Happy to be back. And, we all know that change happens constantly, and that's what causes breakage. So happy to review it.
Absolutely. Always good to have you here, mate. So let's start with the download. My TLDR summary of what to know about the internet this week in a few minutes or less. When it comes to outages, often a seemingly minor issue can cascade into something much bigger. And while the component at issue may appear just like a small cog in a big machine, when it's not working properly or even sticking, the repercussions can be significant. The impact of that malfunctioning cog is often exacerbated by a lack of understanding or visibility into the entire end-to-end service delivery chain. Over the past fortnight, the disruptive power of these seemingly small cogs was on display a number of times, including when something as small as an expired security key had big ramifications for some sites leveraging the .au direct namespaces. And this is what we saw for a number of large Australian websites using directdomain.au, where it failed to resolve for up to an hour, including some major media sites. The cause appeared to be a DNS set key signing error at the .au top-level domain administrator, AUDA. The incident highlighted the importance of tracking all the small things, but particularly encryption artifacts like keys and certificates. So stay tuned for more on the outage later in this episode. Salesforce experienced an issue with multiple cloud services on September 20th that took 4.5 hours to fully clear. The issue manifests itself as users preventing login and access to their services. Like the .au issues, the cause of this Salesforce outage appeared to be a seemingly small thing that ended up having a big impact. The official explanation is that a cybersecurity policy was changed that excessively restricted permissions for selected service-to-service communication, and this resulted in a functional disruption to systems. So no change is ever made in isolation, and validation across the entire service delivery chain by any party instigating any change is the only way to limit unintended impacts. In another example of a seemingly small cog having a significant impact, a recent Azure outage was prolonged when a documented mitigation was undermined by another team's approval process. On September 16th, some Azure SQL database in the East US region experienced persistent errors or timeouts when trying to connect to their databases. The incident lasted all day, though notably occurred on a Saturday, which would have lessened the customer-facing impact. So the incident was caused by a brief power disruption that impacted several racks of compute as well as underlying network infrastructure. Some compute nodes were then unable to boot up due to continued lack of network connectivity. Microsoft said some were stuck in BIOS and required manual mitigation. However, unbeknownst to the on-call team, the documented mitigation forcibly rebooted nodes was actually blocked by an internal approval process as an additional safety measure. Microsoft noted in a post-incident report, since their on-call engineers were not aware of this requirement, they continued to seek alternative mitigation options. Once this was clarified and their engineers understood why the mitigation was not being applied correctly, they proceeded to reboot the relevant nodes. The devil's in the detail, and small things really matter. And what this shows us is that understanding the end-to-end service delivery chain, your role in it, and how what you do affects others is critical to performance and uptime. So switching gears a bit from the outages can come in small packages theme, on September 19th, some people playing single-player games on PlayStation Network reportedly found themselves unable to access titles from their library of downloaded games, or to initiate or connect to game sessions. Users in various regions appear to be impacted, including North America. Multiplayer access appeared not to be affected. PlayStation identified the cause as an unspecified external issues. Now, this outage illustrates the fact that no matter how big or small, or even if one component of the service delivery chain encounters issues, the whole system can be affected. Multiple dependencies all need to function for correct operation, and you can't always assume to know what these dependencies are. In this instance, the assumption could have been that as a single-player game from my library, I wouldn't have to rely on the internet. But things like callback to verify, user identify, or validity of a license, etc., are often required to happen on a regular cadence. So stay tuned for more on this outage later in the episode. And the final outage to note, on September 13th, Microsoft Teams encountered delays or failures sending or receiving messages. The application front end was accessible, but attempts to log into the system and or interact with it resulted in HTTP 500 errors and timeouts, indicating some form of back-end system or distribution layer issue. The impact appeared primarily limited to users in North America, and the problems were ultimately resolved by rerouting the impacted traffic to healthy infrastructure to alleviate the impact. So the quicker you can determine the fault domain in the context of the user experience, the quicker you can mitigate or work around an issue. So that's it for the download for this week. And as always, we included chapter links in the description box below so you can skip ahead to sections that are most interesting to you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, we'd love if you take a minute to hit the subscribe button right now. It really helps us out and makes sure that you're the first to know when a new episode drops. And if you're interested in more outages and analysis like this, definitely encourage you to check out our Internet Outages timeline, which covers several notable Internet outages and application issues from the past year, along with the lessons they leave, and we'll include a link to that in the description box below. So please feel free at any time to email us at internetreport@thousandeyes.com. We always welcome your feedback and questions. And now let's take a look at the overall outage trends we've been seeing. So global outage over the 2-week period from September 11th to 24th initially rose from 184 to 229, which is a 24% increase when we compare that to September the 4th to the 10th. Now this was followed by a 15% decrease the following week, with observed outages dropping from 229 to 194.
Yeah, Mike, I mean, I think it is interesting, to see the US-centric outages reflecting that same pattern, initially rising from 91 to 107, and which was, an 18% increase when compared to September 4th through the 10th. Then they dropped from 107 to 83, the next week, which is about a 22% decrease.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we've talked about this in previous episodes, but this pattern is reflective of previous years, where ThousandEyes observed this increase in outages into September, with an increase in total number of outages rising as we head deeper into September, essentially past that September US Labor Day holiday weekend. Now it looks like many of these outages could be caused by routine scheduled work or maintenance efforts, because a large proportion of these disruptions we see appear to occur outside of what we would term typical business hours.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, the timing of outages definitely seem to suggest they might be around some related type of maintenance work. I mean, a lot of times, with holidays and things, you try to capitalize on when you can do those outages. Typically, they occur while I'm trying to do work because I like to work late at night, which kind of takes me off. But at any rate, scheduling a time when many users will be offline is what carriers try to do and focus on, which probably makes it rough on their NOC team. But at any rate, another interesting trend that I wanted to highlight is that, in September 11th through the 24th period, as the third consecutive fortnight we've seen, US-centric outages account for 45% of the total observed outages, which is a considerable amount. I mean, this also continues the trend with US-centric outages making up at least 40% of the observed outages, which has been the case since April, except during the July 31st through August 13th period.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's a trend we're keeping our eye on, because if I go back on previous years, we sort of saw this increase in the early part of the year, and then we sort of dropped around 35. So by the end of the year, we average around 40%. But this year, we seem to be trending up. Now, we'll look into that further as we go through. But for the moment, we're just going to keep an eye on it to see what happens. As we mentioned at the top of the podcast, a number of large Australian websites using directdomain.au, notably those belonging to media outlets such as the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, failed to resolve for up to an hour due to a DNSSEC key signing error at the .au top-level domain administrator AUDA. During the AUDA incident, DNS resolved the DNSSEC validation while unable to validate the authenticity of the .au DNS records, AUDA wrote in a brief explanation. As a result, the resolves prevented resolution of these domain names for their users. The root cause, AUDA said, was a DNSSEC key signing process that generated an incorrect record for a short period. Observations indicated that a re-signing key itself may have actually expired. As we noted, this incident highlights the importance of tracking all the small things, but particularly encryption artifacts like keys and certificates. Those details are really important. So with that, let's actually dive in and see what this looked like. Now, I'm about to go in and show you what it looks like in the ThousandEyes platform. For all of those listening on audio only on the podcast, what we're going to look at here on the screen is a view of the outages as seen from the ThousandEyes platform. But I'll be sure to talk you through so you can see what we're talking about, and so you don't miss out. And for those who aren't familiar, ThousandEyes is a platform that gives you a great view of the entire digital supply chain. We have ThousandEyes agents across the internet, providing us multiple vantage points so we can see what disruptions are happening at both the network and application server levels. Visibility like this can be especially useful to help operation teams quickly identify and fix issues that come up, in addition to creating mitigation strategies in advance that can enable you to minimize any impacts. All right, so what we're looking at here is I'm looking at an HTTP server test, and I want to look at that because I want to be able to see this process going through, and then we're going to look at what we're doing from a DNS trace perspective. So first of all, what I've actually got here, is we see the connection method. So we can actually see it. I'm looking specifically if I'm resolving to www.abc.net.au, so that .au domain. So what I can see here, Bernie, is I'm actually looking then at the availability across the top, and this tells me that I can actually get to that website. And as we come across here to the right-hand side, so that whole green section there, I'm showing 100% availability. Then I start to see it drop around this 10 past midnight UTC. I start to see sort of go down to 25% and then go down to 0% availability. Now, if I actually look down to the map below, so underneath there I have the map and I can actually see some locations. So I'm actually looking at here, and obviously we're talking about ABC, which is the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. So where my vantage points are, and this is starting to show my vantage points from around the world. This is where we're actually testing from to test this visibility. And what you can actually see, these are distributed around the world, so I wouldn't have access to that. So it looks like I'm something fundamentally failing at that point. I can also see this in the right-hand side there. What I have essentially, it's a sequence of connectivity. So I'll actually sort of resolve the name first of all, and then I go through and do the connect before I actually then start to sort of connect through up to layer 4 and then start to exchange information and access the site, as it were. So straight away here I can actually sort of see it's failing at that DNS level. I can see it's there, so this is where I need to look. I could go in then look at the network path, but all it would tell me was that I can't resolve it, so therefore I'm not even going to look to a path because I don't know how to get there. So let's actually now just take a look at what that looked like from a DNS trace perspective. So what we're looking at now, Bernie, is we've actually gone into an actual DNS trace. So what this is actually looking at that process. So actually what we go through to kind of resolve the name as we sort of build up through from there. And what I can actually start to see here is then if I actually look again, I see that same outage. So again, I'm looking at availability. You can see on the other side there, specifically what I'm looking at, here's a DNS trace in that pane on the outside. But just very quickly, if I actually sort of come out from there, I can actually sort of see the trace actually go through to see it. So I can see here, what I've done is I've populated another window. And what this is telling me is the processes. So I can see all the names going through right through to the authoritative server as I go through to sort of look to these actual names as I resolve them through there. Now again, just quickly, if I just jump then straight into where we see that outage, what I actually see is, first of all, I can see some of the service could be reached, the error message I'm seeing in the status, but then I look at that and I can cut down to that authoritative server, no service could be reached. I can't actually get there, therefore I can't resolve it, which is why we're seeing that failure. So DNS is one thing, Bernie. When we actually start to talk about that connectivity that we get, so we say, yeah, as you said, fundamental issue where I actually can't reach it, but there's two processes going on here. So one is we actually need to resolve the name, but can you just talk us through what we mean when we talk about a DNSSEC?
Yeah, so DNSSEC was really designed to provide more secure DNS. So it's basically using a public key cryptography method. Assuming that client, requests an A record, like in this case, that record for say acmehero.com for validating that local recursion server, it's going to go through the regular steps like a DNS server would. And that normal recursion process occurs beginning at the root and moving all the way down, which is what we're able to show here is those, root servers and the fact that it's not coming back. And if that signature is invalid or, expires or doesn't show up, then it's going to be basically ignored. So you wouldn't get the resolution for that with the RSIG associated with the A record for acmehero.com. And, that recursion process and those authoritative servers and the DNS key record, that's all tied together and really is what creates that extra layer of security associated with these domains.
So that's basically, as you said, to sort of validate, to make sure that who I say I am is who I am. So I'm authorized to actually be able to tell you this is how you get to, in this case, abc.net.au going through there.
Exactly. And it helps reduce, things like DNS poisoning, things like that, that could occur, just making it overall a more secure methodology around DNS.
Yeah, absolutely. An interesting thing around this is just so that's a method there, and it's sort of protect us to going on from a DNS point of view, totally valid, and there's a lot of it out there. But interestingly, this would have shown up as a DNS error. We talked about it being DNS. It's only when we actually look at the details into the trace that we start to see what's going on here, and then we'll actually go through, and you can actually see then if you actually look to sort of resolve that. And because it was happening in Australian daytime, I could actually see what was going on, and we could actually then see the certificate sort of being rejected when you looking at that process, or not validated more accurately there. So the point I'm trying to make in that ramble there is that this was something sort of that is fundamental to DNS, but not DNS itself, but it manifested itself in a DNS issue.
Exactly, which is important to have, not just as you showed the HTTP server test, but have a DNS server test and the trace test to back it all up and combine those together in your troubleshooting methodology. And as you mentioned before, like the small cog kind of piece, and this would be kind of that foundational cog.
Yeah, absolutely. And next, what I really want to talk about is the PlayStation network outage. So Bernie, can you give us a quick overview of what we saw there?
Yeah, so on the 19th, single players, on the PlayStation Network, reportedly found themselves unable to access, titles from their library or the downloaded games that, they initiate, an online connection for those game sessions. So users in various regions appeared to be impacted, including North America. Multiplayer access appeared to be unaffected, but anything that needed to have that, digital check-in with the store was definitely having some issues. PlayStation did report some unspecified external related issues as the root cause, but didn't specifically name any third-party provider.
Yeah, that's a great overview, Bernie. And sort of adding on that, what I wanted to do is a few things that we observed about the outage in the ThousandEyes platform. So again, we're going back into ThousandEyes platform. Here we're looking at an HTTP server test as we were sort of before. But really want to show a couple of things here. So again, I'm looking at availability. Interestingly here, we saw it chopping, right? So we can actually get there. The difference between that is if we actually look then down to the bottom view there, where we have the map of the table and the reachability. What we're actually seeing then is we're seeing that sort of failure, or the errors, I should say, rather than failure. We're seeing them at the HTTP and the receive level. So what that tells me then is, again, I'm looking at something, I can actually reach a network, so I'm actually able to resolve name, and actually then go into the back end, and I can actually, this is where the problem is where I'm having some sort of connectivity within that back end system there, or in this case, sort of the external provider where that's actually hosted.
Yeah, the status by phase really helps set the stage right away, just with a visual cue of like how far do we get in that connectivity with the three-way handshake and DNS and all those pieces. It's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And just another thing I want to point out, we've heard anecdotally this sort of impacted North American users there. But again, if you're looking at our map there, we can see sort of vantage points we talked about from around the globe. This is where we're running tests for. Now, what we're saying here is that if someone had been connecting from those locations, it doesn't necessarily reflect the users themselves, but this is saying if you were coming in from that area there, you would have potentially had this issue or experienced the same degradation there. So this is what we had. But the fact then, anecdotally, we're talking about it from a North American perspective. I said it came out for report, might have been something to do with time of day, although, much like yourself, Ernie, these people are sort of 24/7, the system there. So that's less likely to be an issue. It may well have been something, and again, it's difficult to speculate there, but it might have been something to do specific to that group of users and their identification, their verification, the licensing, how that was set up there.
Exactly. And I mean, you start to see a trend of a lot of these online-based authentication backend services, right? And, if you don't have full stack observability associated with it, and those things start to go sideways, you don't really have the backend visibility to be able to tell, like, hey, is this the API gateway or some key or something like that that's broken, or some microservice that maybe didn't scale properly, things like that.
Yeah, and that's actually a really important point, because this then comes in saying, we're talking about FSO, we're looking into those sort of back ends, you have to be able to own it. But if I don't own the application, such as in this PlayStation, I need to be able to understand those complete chains. I need to be able to understand specifically what's going on. So we're talking about PlayStation Network here, we're talking about gaming, those things, but the same situation can occur within a business SaaS. So the points you've just talked about there, sort of the verification, the identification, the back end license or authentication, in the old days, when I'm going to drag you into my age bracket now, Bernie, when we were sort of starting up, if we had software, we downloaded it, we verified the license key once, and then that away it went. Here, what we're doing is we're relying on this internet connection, because you're constantly having to validate against that license as it goes to make sure that we haven't swapped out the license key, or that we are still a valid user using it from that system that hasn't been taken over by somebody else.
Exactly. I mean, that transition to basically network-based authentication for licensing was a vast improvement. I mean, I remember the old crypto keys you had to plug in the back of a server, and that'll date me as well. But, if that went bad or something, or if somebody knocked it off, then all of a sudden your software just stopped working for everybody. I hated those things, and I was really happy about the network-based license piece, but things like this really shine the light on where those failures can occur.
Exactly, and this comes back to that, sort of. This is a big cog, if you like, but this, but it was an unknown dependency, I guess. So let's forget where the failure was. The failure was across there, but what highlighted it was, I wasn't aware I had to connect across the internet from those. So it's these hidden dependencies you don't know about. So you might have mapped out something, and all of a sudden a third-party API has changed, or the API gateway we're going to is actually making a call to somewhere else. Now, if I'm unaware that I actually have to rely on that particular dependency or that third-party external system for my application to function correctly, then I'm chasing my tail. All I know is it's down. I've got angry users complaining, and we're not going anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, this is a classic page out of the SRE handbook.
Absolutely. So Bernie, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I really hope to have you back on again really soon.
Super stoked. Thanks, Mike. I mean, this is great to review the latest outages and some of the trends.
And we could talk about old times as well, which is always good.
Exactly. That's the reason I have gray hair.
That's it. So that's our show. Please like and subscribe. We really appreciate it, and it's valuable to us. As if I mentioned at the top, it not only does it ensure that you're notified as soon as a new episode is available, but it really helps us shape the content of the show for you. Follow us on X, formerly Twitter, at ThousandEyes, and any questions, feedback, guests, just general information you want to provide to us, please send us a note at internetreport@thousandeyes.com. And so until next time, goodbye.